So good morning, everyone. My name is Marlies Knoops, and I am, as Noreen said, the head of the project called Berliner MODELKITAS für die Integration und Inklusion von Kindern aus Familien mit Fluchterfahrung, which would be Berlin Model Kitas for the integration and inclusion of children of refugee families in English. So quite similar, don't you think? So sometimes German isn't this hard. Today I will tell you a bit about this project and why it was developed, how we work and what we do, and especially what we learned during our work with child refugees and their families in the ECC system. I'm happy to share some of our findings and discuss them later on maybe. So first of all, what are the Berlin Model Kitas? The Berlin Model Kitas are 8 independently operating early childhood education and care centers across Berlin, which were nominated by the Berlin local government in autumn 2016, so 1 year after the long summer of migration. These daycare centers all already had experiences in receiving, taking care of, and educating child refugees, and are now professionalizing their work within this program. The project is conducted by the Verband Evangelischer Tageseinrichtungen für Kinder, which is a department for ECC issues within the Berliner Diakonie, which is one of the big German social welfare organizations. And it is sponsored by the government of Berlin. So before I tell you what we do within the project, I will give you just a very short overview on the German ECC system so that you get an impression of the situation and the background. So in a nutshell, in Germany, the task of early childhood education and care lies within the social welfare system. And since Germany is a federal system, the 16 federal states themselves are responsible for the educational sector, and they are funding the ECC system. And in Germany, we call the daycare centers Kindertageseinrichtung, which is why you find the short form, like this abbreviation, KITA, in the title of the project name and basically everywhere else in the field of ECC. So whenever you hear someone talking about KITAs, you can imagine these non-profit daycare centers for early childhood education, each one with an own concept, but especially in Berlin, following the same educational program. Okay, so another important fact is that in Germany, every child, including refugee children, has the legal right to access the ECC system, either in a center or family daycare from the age of 1. Especially in Berlin, this right is much more of a theoretical nature by now because we are facing a real big lack of free places. But altogether, the vast majority of children in Germany is attending the ECC system at least when they turn 3. Just to give you a short impression of the situation in the last 3 years regarding refugees and asylum, in 2016, the year when the project started, around 745,000 refugees were coming to Germany, and about 27 of them to Berlin. And in the last column, you can see the figures for Berlin, which show that in the last 3 years, Berlin received around about 70,000 people asking for asylum, although you always have to take into account that not every one of them was allowed to stay or got the right to stay there. But when you see the percentage rate of the refugees aged under 6, so potential candidates for the ECC system, you might imagine that there was some change around the corner. And which brings us back to the model kitas. So why was the project developed? In summer 2015 and 16, we had the situation that a lot of these ECC centers felt under enormous pressure and had this one-sided view only of the challenges of integrating refugee families. And heaps of questions arose how to deal with these big new challenges. Meanwhile, the resources regarding staff and time were little, and also there seemed to be a lack of knowledge and specialized methods to receive and take care of these children. So the project was established with the goal of strengthening the ECC centers in the field of receiving, taking care of, and educating refugee families and creating a supportive system by collating experiences and knowledge and making this expertise as well as useful information and examples of good practice easily accessible to other ECC centers. And also by strengthening networking and exchange between the practitioners. So how do we do this? We use a framework of regular project meetings and hospitations for exchanging information and experiences, reflecting on our pedagogical work for further specialized education and networking. By this, the kitas hopefully get qualified and professionalize their practice in receiving, taking care of, and educating refugee children. And in the end, this specialized knowledge, their experiences and examples of good practice is transferred to other ECC centers by site visits and consultations, by a homepage with working materials, and we also developed a manual like this one here, and organized a Berlin-wide workshop day to open up a dialogue and to show you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You just can use our network. So this is a broad idea, and by now, exactly 2 years after the project started, I can say that we carried out a lot of this idea, but primarily had a long instructive way with very interesting processes and developments, I would say. So let me tell you a bit more about these processes and findings within the program. Although, as I said, the MODELKITAS already had experiences in receiving and educating refugee children, they somehow still felt uncertain. So when I asked them what they expected from the project or what they needed the most, they all asked for more information, facts, knowledge about how to overcome cultural or language barriers, what are the parameters of refugee and asylum law, what does it mean to take care of traumatized children, and so on. Questions that all more or less refer to that one bigger, more abstract question of how do we integrate these refugee families and children. At this point of view, the families arriving were perceived more or less as a homogeneous group of strangers, like the refugees. This perception, and it was heavily influenced by the media reports in the end, I would say, often led to a feeling of chaos, of being overtaxed, or of being pushed too hard, and all of a sudden into the task of integrating these countless children and families. And everyone was looking for a recipe. But by taking in this perspective, which has its focus on the refugee child, you can't see anything else. The individual character or resources and needs seem to be limited, literally enclosed by this red line here. With the focus, it seems as if these children are special, and as if none of our well-known methods and pedagogical concept would ever fit. The question remains, how can we deal with these refugee children? And it is always accompanied by the fear to do something wrong. I don't say that is completely nonsense or that you never have to adapt your practice when you're dealing with a refugee child. But this focus only on the capacity of being refugee makes it extremely hard for the practitioners or pedagogical staff to react in line with the individual needs of or requirements of the child. So the more we discuss these questions and insecurities in dealing with child refugees and their families, and ask ourselves what they would need in which situation and how to act also, especially when you're confronted also with critical voices from other parents, the kitas realized we have to change the focus. These are children, and we know how to deal with children. So to see a refugee child as child in the first place, a child with a refugee background, leave space for other qualities and individuality. It gives back a personal face to the child, and this makes it easier for the pedagogical staff to handle the situation because finally they are back on well-known track. A child in the process of learning a language, everyday life in a kita. And what a resource when you're multilingual already at this age. Also a multilingual or non-German speaking family. For a lot of ECC centers in a city like Berlin, common as bread. An emotionally heavy troubled child. Not every child experiences a flight will be traumatized, but even if, it will not be the first one in the kita. If you see a child of a refugee family, you might see a very shy, frightened child because it maybe already experienced a lot of painful separations in its young life. Or you may see a very responsible child who is used to take care of his or her little sibling during the flight or when their parents are busy with organizing life. To have the background story in mind is, as always, helpful to better understand the behavior. But what counts the most is that you can see that child as a child. In the case of a very responsible, too grown-up child, you would react pedagogically adequate, by example, for creating a safe space where the child can be a child again. So you get the point. And this is what the MODELKITAS found out as well. Not everything is new. Of course, most of the time, the situation is very complex because a lot of factors come together, but still, I would say it has a lot to do with the focus. You choose how you can react in an appropriate manner in the best possible way. And actually, this was also a key message for the pedagogical staff during a training of trauma pedagogy, because they were always afraid of doing something wrong. And maybe Sibylle Rothkegel might confirm that later on as an expert. You can't do anything extremely wrong when you pay attention to the individual need of a child and create a positive, secure space with clear rules and routines where children can orientate themselves and be part of the group and behave like children again. And you're actively preventing discrimination by stressing the diverse individual characteristics. You could call it diversity-aware education or culture-sensitive education. And by this, I do not mean like the Arabic or the African culture, because I don't think that something like this exists in such a general frame, but something more in detail, like a family culture, or the culture of communication, or the food culture, simply the way in which the child is or was socialized. To be culture sensitive means to be aware of different concepts of childhood and education. For example, how children are raised in another social context. Are they used to be educated by one or two main adults as attachment figures? Or, like it's the case in many non-Western rural societies, are they used to grow up with and be educated mainly by other children, like in a peer group? These questions lead to a different action regarding ECC. For example, how to arrange the first days or weeks of settling in a child refugee. And it also influences the dialogue with the parents, which is really important, where you have to find out what are the values, what is the meaning of education and care in their understanding, what are their priorities and what are yours. So by tackling these questions and reflecting situations of the daily work of the kitas, like working with parents from different language background or at an eye level, and discussing different images of the child, and also dealing with xenophobia and racism, because even in a colorful city like Berlin, we had these demonstrations against building accommodations for refugees just next to the kita, or parents calling me anonymously and asking how many more of that black-haired children are there coming. Their children are in the kita to learn German in the end, or why this and this kita is not serving pig meat anymore, or suddenly celebrating Ramadan. Actually, a lot of interface and intercultural dialogue situations or questions of equality, personal norms and values arose. The kitas wanted to take these concerns seriously and started the dialogue with parents and within the team. And they realized, the bigger question is actually not on how to deal with refugee families, but on our attitude and our pedagogical practice in the context of multiculturalism and diversity. It is about participation. How can we adapt our pedagogical practice to enable every family to participate in our kita? our community. And this again is the question of attitude. You have to find out, you have to discuss and work on your attitude as a team if you want to have a strong and maybe the strongest instrument to guarantee access to ECEC for every child in a context of diversity. And attitude is nothing you can just train within a single workshop. It's a process and it needs time. But it's absolutely and definitely necessary to handle situations of discrimination or racism. So compared to the first question of how do we integrate refugee families, the second question goes further and asks for an inclusive, holistic approach. To work under this inclusive approach, which takes in every child and its family instead of leaving it to integration and just focusing on the refugees, is another key principle the Berliner MODELKITAS found out. Maybe one simple example, I like it a lot because it shows so clearly the process of switching this focus again and taking the already existing situation into account. You can literally hear the penny drop. So one of the Kita supervisors told me that when the Kita received some Syrian refugee families, they were lucky to have an Arabic-speaking pedagogical staff colleague who translated every announcement into Arabic as a step of opening up for integration and to overcome language barrier. Perfect. But then there was also a Polish father in the Kita coming to the supervisor saying, for me it's very irritating. I couldn't read the German notes and still can't in total, and now don't understand the Arabic ones at all. So the Kita realized, true, these Syrian families have not been the first families coming to our Kita with a foreign language. But we haven't realized this as a problem before. Indeed, they counted 8 nationalities in their Kita after this incident and started to ask the multilingual parents to add a translation to the German info sheets. And then they thought about analphabetic parents. But living diversity does not always ask for such a big effort. You can live it in the little things. For example, by offering like these skin-colored crayons with 9 different tones of skin color, not only the pinkish beige one. Or like doing some research, I also found these true color skin bandages. Actually, we use this more often as a food for thoughts because kids anyhow swear to these colorful little band-aids with animals on it. But you see, it's really interesting just to think about. So I guess time is running, and one last key principle the MODELKITAS would never go without: networking. To have a network with strong partners is a crucial instrument for good work and a big value in times of complex questions and little resources. You don't have to know everything, you just have to know the right number to call. You don't have to spend all your resources to translate all information or support refugee families with all that bureaucracy. Maybe that's actually a bigger problem in Germany. But when you know where to get an interpreter or a social advice service, you don't have to spend all this energy. The workshop day we organized last year for all Berlin ECEC practitioners stood under the title Good work needs a strong network, because this is what the MODELKITAS experienced. Another example, one of the Kitas has the great situation that half of the pedagogical staff is male. Unusual, but great in terms of diversity. So when they took in a Muslim refugee family, the mother didn't like to have her baby girl, have a man changing the diapers of her baby girl, and talk to the head of the Kita. But since the staff was half male, half female, they couldn't always wait until a female educator could take care of changing the girl. So the head of the Kita activated her contacts and invited an imam from a neighboring Muslim parish to judge the situation. He came and talked to the mother, telling her that in his interpretation of the Quran, it wasn't a problem at all in the case of young children who haven't reached the age of 14. So the mother was really happy that her concerns were taken seriously and the situation was resolved. So, a strong network will help you to share responsibility, save resources, and find good solutions for complex problems. And finally, and in my point of view, this is especially important for everyone working in the social field, where it seems very hard from time to time to get the right distance from the problems without having the feeling of hanging the person concerned out to dry. You stay professional by acknowledging the limits of your pedagogical work and meanwhile transfer the request to professionals in the asked subject. So you can still help without working until midnight. So one short summary. The key principles the MODELKITAS are following to support a strong and open-minded attitude in the work with children of refugee families are: first, a focus on the individual child with an awareness of your own prejudice. Second, an inclusive approach as answer to diversity and as an instrument to work on access to ECC for every child. And third, a strong network with partners you can rely on for professional support. By using these key principles, it becomes easier to see the challenges as chances, because it still is hard work to self-critically reflect your personal values and norms and your practice, and as a result modify and improve known methods and concepts, and then start over and reflect them again. And also strengthening the team by developing a strong attitude will need time and power. But this is a great chance, because by fighting for children's rights, in this way, you will automatically improve the quality of ECC, because you will fight for the access for every child to early childhood education and participation. And who wants to question that this is not worth it? Thank you very much for your attention.